This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu fights to block the new alliance from taking office, criticizing new coalition as dangerous. International pressure mounts on Ethiopia to grant humanitarian access to Tigray as famine looms. And parents of 136 kidnapped Nigerian students want government to do more to get their children back. This is Africa Live. A very warm welcome to the show. I am Peninah Karibe, and joining me with the business headlines is Uche.
Thank you, Peninah. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. South Africa turns to private firms to improve the country's electricity supply. And Ghana cuts its lending rate to 13.5% as it recovers from the pandemic. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, back to you, Peninah.
Thank you, Uche. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is fighting back against a coalition of his opponents. 8 political parties have agreed to form a new government. If the group wins approval by parliament, it would remove Netanyahu from power after 12 years as prime minister. Netanyahu has called on right-wing lawmakers to block the new alliance from taking office and criticized the coalition as dangerous. Stephanie Fried reports from Tel Aviv on the challenges ahead.
Change. That's the name and aim of Israel's newest coalition, made up of disparate partners whose ideologies range from conservative right to liberal left.
Mr. President, I am calling to say that I have formed a government.
The coalition's formation technically ends the term for Israel's longest-serving Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and endeavors to unfreeze years of political stalemate.
We're in a rough economic state, a rough security state. There was no way a responsible adult wouldn't step in and say, enough is enough, stop.
But in a country where governments last an average 2 of their 4-year tenures, future challenges are guaranteed. If approved by Israel's parliament, the new coalition will see Naftali Bennett, the pro-settlement leader of the far-right Yamina party, serve as prime minister for 2 years. He'll be succeeded by centrist Yesh Atid party head Yair Lapid, but skeptics question whether the new government will survive long enough for Lapid to move into the prime minister position. Political orientations among coalition partners run the gamut, from Arab members of the Islamic movement's political wing to right-wing politicians opposed to Palestinian statehood. Change coalition leaders will reportedly avoid charged issues like settlement, Palestinian statehood, and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for a year. They'll focus instead on neglected education, infrastructure, and health programs, and pass a long-absent state budget. Benjamin Netanyahu vows he'll continue fighting as he stands trial on corruption charges and moves to the opposition. But with the advent of the new coalition, his position has substantially weakened. Stephanie Fried, CGTN, Tel Aviv.
China has criticized the U.S. for spying on its allies. Danish media has reported that the U.S. National Security Agency was working with Denmark's intelligence agency to spy on European leaders. French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Angela Merkel responded to the news reports on Monday, saying what the U.S. did was unacceptable. The spying allegations come even as the U.S. places restrictions on Chinese tech companies, accusing them of spying on behalf of the Chinese government, allegations Beijing has denied. At a news conference on Thursday, the Chinese Foreign Ministry said the USA's alleged spying on its allies underscored Washington's hypocrisy.
For a long time, the United States, relying on its technological advantage, has been eavesdropping on the world on a large scale. On the other hand, it has been unreasonably suppressing the legitimate businesses of other countries on the grounds of so-called national security. There is every reason to suspect that the so-called clean network is designed to support America's high-tech monopoly. and open the door to unimpeded espionage. Could this clean network be another surveillance network controlled by the U.S.? The United States should immediately stop the vicious practice of large-scale eavesdropping and suppression of foreign companies under the guise of national security and do the world justice.
World health leaders are meeting in Oxford, hoping to reach a deal to help reduce the risk of global pandemics and other threats to health. G7 ministers want to improve early detection of animal-borne diseases and ensure poorer nations get more access to COVID vaccines. Andrew Wilson reports from Oxford.
Summer 2021 is turning into a global balancing act of competing priorities surrounding this pandemic. The unpredictability of coronavirus variants has tempered some of the international confidence in the global vaccination program. The G7 leaders will descend on the UK next week to thrash out differing positions on international travel, healthcare cooperation, data sharing and the importance of robust clinical standards. And they'll find that even with its world-beating vaccine program, the British government has just taken the last remaining holiday destination, Portugal, off its safe travel list. Even on the steps of the G7 Health Ministers Summit in Oxford, the government message was sounding familiar.
Well, we do have to be careful about international travel, and the Delta variant is just one new variant, another new variant, and it shows why it's right to be careful about international travel. And countries around the world have learnt the importance of that, including us here in the UK. So that's something we look at very carefully, and I fully respect the fact that my counterparts across the world also look very carefully at that sort of at international travel, and they're right to do so.
At the summit, the agenda includes global health security, data sharing and clinical trials, but will be dominated by vaccines, equitable vaccine supply and international vaccine production, especially with the guest countries India, South Korea, South Africa and Australia joining the debates remotely. There's a lot of pressure, including from Washington now, to allow other countries to produce the successful vaccines, AstraZeneca, Moderna and Pfizer, in their own plants. Britain and Germany, however, are still against it. But with the variants persisting in slowing timetables and reducing confidence, all the medical community still has to offer is that one solution: immunise the world's population. And that was never going to be easy. Andrew Wilson, CGTN, Oxford.
Pressure is mounting on Ethiopia to declare a ceasefire in the northern province of Tigray to allow humanitarian organizations to reach millions of people who face famine. The war in Tigray has disrupted harvests and led to huge problems for the delivery of aid to communities, particularly in rural areas. More than 2 million are thought to have been displaced by the conflict. The UK has called for a cessation of hostilities by all conflict parties and unfettered humanitarian access so that aid can flow and famine can be averted. The UN says up to 90% of the population in Tigray are in need of food aid. We spoke to CGTN's Ethiopia correspondent Girum Chala to find out more about the situation on the ground. Take a listen.
At the moment, the situation is there, but the government is saying that it is trying to address this situation. And by the way, from 93 localities, the administrative areas in Tigray region, only 14 of them are being administered by the government when it comes to providing relief services, but the rest 79 are being covered by the UN and other relief organizations. So the government is working, saying that it's working with aid organizations, and it's also collaborating others who wish to support this relief services. By the way, we spoke to a higher official from Ministry of Foreign Affairs just now for this report. They said that the conflict in Tigray is not really happening. There is no major conflict happening. Of course, in pocket areas in different parts of the regional state, there are also sabotage, majorly, as they said, from the TPLF side. And also the government mission of capturing former leaders of TPLF is ongoing. The mission is not completed yet, but they say that in general, the Tigray regional state is peaceful, and the provisional administration itself is handling so many government relief services.
The Ugandan minister who survived an assassination attempt on Tuesday has been discharged from hospital. His daughter and driver were killed in the attack by unknown gunmen riding on two motorcycles. Ugandan police have released CCTV footage of the assailants, but the men have not been identified. Isabel Nakiria tells us more.
The former chief of Defense Forces and Works Minister General Katumba Wamala said he was feeling much better after a surgery to remove bullets that were lodged in his arms. He left hospital in the capital Kampala, his arms still bandaged, to attend his daughter's burial. General Katumba said he didn't know the motives of the attackers. Several people have been arrested. 4 officers manning the government's CCTV control room have also been arrested. Police say they could be charged with negligence after some cameras were found to be non-functional. A team of security operatives from police and the army are still piecing together evidence before a conclusive report is released. Investigators picked up cartridges from the scene of crime for forensic analysis. Ugandan police are also appealing to the public to help identify the attackers who were seen on CCTV footage trailing General Katumba's car, though their faces are not visible. The footage shows the back view of the 4 men riding on 2 motorcycles with concealed number plates. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Meanwhile, in Nigeria, officials from Niger State confirmed gunmen abducted 136 students from an Islamic school on Sunday. This number is lower than the estimate of 200 previously given by the federal government. On Sunday, an armed gang on motorcycles attacked the town of Tegina. State officials contacted parents in the following days to ascertain the exact number of missing children. President Buhari, in a statement issued on Monday, said security agents were searching for about 200 students. Niger State Deputy Governor Ahmed Mohamed Ketso then told reporters the number of missing children had been established. Criminal gangs have been blamed for the rise in kidnappings for ransom in northern Nigeria in recent months. More than 800 students have been abducted since December.
It's a very complex situation. The government has said it is not going to pay ransom. But obviously the government says it still hopes to negotiate the release of the students. There's a possibility the government might bring in a negotiator like we have seen in the past in that state. The last set of students who were kidnapped in that state back in February, the government had to bring in an Islamic cleric who negotiated the release of the students. So maybe at some point the government might have to bring in the Islamic cleric to talk with the bandits, but of course the government has made it very clear that it is not going to pay ransom, and I think the bandits understand that. That's the reason why they are not talking with the government. They are actually talking with the owner of the school and indirectly with the parents.
Banditry and kidnapping are fast becoming Nigeria's major security threats. Student abduction has been gaining traction in northern Nigeria since the Chibok girls' kidnapping in 2014. Many believe the high rate of unemployment and proliferation of weapons are worsening the situation. CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam brings us the story on life after being kidnapped for 2 sisters.
This is 19-year-old Victory Sani and her 17-year-old sister, Rejoice. The siblings are 2 out of about 37 students abducted from a forestry college in northwest Kaduna State. Still visibly shaken weeks after their release, they relive their kidnapping experience. From living in the bush to constantly being threatened by their gun-wielding abductors, it was traumatizing for the young ladies.
Continued for days become weeks, and the rest, no food. No good food. Concerning the place we sleep, it's always on the ground. When it's evening time, there is man that always help us to cut leaves. We spray it on the ground and we'll lie down under cold. Sometimes we wake up in the morning and we'll see scorpions and snakes around us. There was no change of clothes. The water, very dirty. We drank river water. We spent about 55 days in the bush.
It happened in the hostel. They broke the fence and came in. They said we should stand up and we started moving. We moved for 4 hours. we got to the bike, and on the bike we moved for 2 hours.
After 55 days in captivity, they were released to reunite with their families. A nightmare these girls and their family continue to relive.
From day one that our children were kidnapped, we were under psychological arrest. We were under mental arrest. We were under emotional arrest. It was in our presence they brought the children, citing them. In fact, I was overwhelmed with joy, and I've been basking in that joy from then till now.
Any sound gets me scared like that, and anytime I'm sleeping, I still see these people in my dreams.
Insecurity is fast crippling Nigeria's education system. Students risk their lives to secure an education, and the situation is worsening. In the last 6 months, about 800 students have been abducted from their schools in coordinated attacks.
What is driving kidnap for ransom or abduction in Nigeria? Reward for the crime. In this instance, the reward is ransom. So the ability for these criminals to not only place a ransom demand, but to collect the ransom demand and to spend it is the number one driver. These non-state actors have more weapons in their hold than the security agencies have, and so they are bold about it. Both the federal and state government need to pursue a policy of engagement with the people and even with the bad guys, so that they understand what is happening and then they take measures to stop this. Currently, I'm not seeing enough engagement.
School abductions didn't just start recently. The 2014 Chibok schoolgirls kidnapping shocked the entire world, raising global outrage. Reports of ransoms being paid for people to be released continues to spark debates on the profitable criminal enterprise that's put the lives of many children at risk, many of whom aren't lucky enough to make it out alive. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
On June 3, 2021, State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi hosted the fourth trilateral video dialogue between foreign ministers of China, Afghanistan and Pakistan in the Chinese city of Guiyang. The three sides stressed that peace and reconciliation process in Afghanistan should be effectively pushed forward, ceasefire should be realized at an early date, and violence should be ended. The withdrawal of foreign troops from Afghanistan should be carried out in a responsible and orderly manner to prevent deterioration of security situation in Afghanistan and the return of terrorist forces. The solution to the Afghan issue should fully reflect the principle of led by Afghans and owned by Afghans, support Afghanistan in becoming an independent, sovereign and neutral state, pursue a moderate Muslim policy, firmly fight terrorism and live in harmony with other countries, especially neighboring countries. The meeting issued the joint statement of the fourth Foreign Ministers' dialogue between China, Afghanistan and Pakistan. The Chinese Communist Party has made remarkable progress in uplifting China's economy and people out of poverty and stands as a practical example for African nations. This is according to Zimbabwe's former ambassador to China, Christopher Muchangwa. CGTN's Foray Mokutuya spoke to him about the Chinese Communist Party's 100th anniversary and the leadership of President Xi Jinping.
President Xi came to Harare en route to the FOCAC summit in 2015. How significant was that? What were your impressions of him from that?
When he was going to attend the China-Africa summit in Johannesburg, I think it was in 2015, he made it a point of making Zimbabwe stop over. You know, it means he cherishes the bilateral relationships which were started by Chairman Mao and Chu Enlai in the 1960s and our Chairman Herbert Chitepo and the likes of our General Tongogara and of course our present President Emerson E. D. Mnangagwa, who was trained as a young man of a fledgling nationalist guerrilla army in Nanjing in the 1960s. So he puts a premium on the relationships between Zimbabwe and China, and that trip, that stopover for a few hours was a remarkable show of a gesture of solidarity with Zimbabwe. He's a modest man who is passionate about the role of China, but who is also very, very internationalistic in his outlook, as has been espoused in his Belt and Road Initiative. This is a good leader who we all would be happy to be associated with.
What have been your impressions of President Xi Jinping's leadership over the past years?
President Xi has been very good at digging into the history of China from the experience of the previous leaders of the Chinese Communist Party in the last 100 years, but more so since the triumph of the revolution. And he has taken the best aspects of his mentors, the Communist part of China, the various from Chairman Mao, Deng Xiaoping, and the other modern leaders. He has gleaned from them and built a corpus of knowledge which has made him make China scale the challenge of modernization. Now China is focusing on the key technologies of the future so that the economy of China can deliver more, not only to the Chinese people, but to the world. His Belt and Road initiative on how we should integrate and share the development experience of the whole world in a global village is a remarkable philosophy of how humanity should approach the shared challenges of how we can integrate and increase prosperity, shared prosperity by humanity.
You're watching Africa Live. Let's take a short break. Coming up. The FBI investigating cyber attack that disrupted meat production in several countries, including the US and Australia. And we feature Nigerian innovators turning waste plastic into cash.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Aden, Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The FBI is now investigating a cyber attack on the world's largest meat processor. JBS says the hack disrupted meat production in several countries, including the US and Australia. Greg Navarro reports from Sydney.
Offices for Australia's largest meat processing company were empty in Queensland earlier this week, where thousands of workers were expected to lose several days' worth of wages. JBS says it was forced to shut down its Australian operations because of a cyber attack over the weekend.
So it is actually the system, the network through which actually the attacks happened. So probably the hackers found out a way to get into one of the system, and because then multiple systems are connected through ports and those ports were not properly guarded, so probably they could become successful in terms of launching those kind of attacks.
The Brazil-based company reportedly told the White House that disruptions to its Australian and North American operations likely originated from criminals operating in Russia.
JBS is another example of a major consumer company being impacted by organized crime, seeking to impose costs so that they can get paid a ransom.
About 70% of what JBS produces in Australia is exported. The company has nearly 50 facilities around the country, including feedlots and meat processing sites. There's also the flow-on effect to consider, meaning there are a lot of people and businesses that aren't directly employed by JBS, but certainly rely on its business and, more importantly, its money. Last month, a cyber attack on U.S.-based Colonial Pipeline led to gasoline shortages across parts of the country. Experts say the types of cyber attacks where criminals block access until a ransom is paid are becoming increasingly common and often go unreported.
Of course, the reputation of the business. So that matters a lot because they don't want themselves to be seen by the consumers or the customers that a company whose data is being breached, whose privacy of the data has been violated by some third party or some hackers or somebody else.
I think a big part of this is that you have to make sure you actually have visibility into the threat. And a lot of organizations aren't able to find and fix different vulnerabilities faster than the adversaries that they're fighting.
JBS says it has made significant progress in resuming operations at the majority of its facilities in Australia and North America. Greg Navarro, CGTN, Sydney.
Civil society organizations and the health department in Tunisia are launching the first COVID-19 vaccination campaign for irregular migrants and refugees from sub-Saharan Africa. Hundreds of irregular migrants that failed to reach European shores will get inoculated. The campaign aims to provide the best health conditions at migrant hosting centers. Adnet Shawashi reports from Tunis.
More than 230 undocumented migrants have been rescued by the Tunisian Navy in less than 2 weeks. Official data shows that more than 90% of these migrants are from sub-Saharan Africa. Despite their illegal status, they are eligible for COVID-19 vaccine.
The irregular migrants who are rescued off the Tunisian coast are usually in fragile health. Since the outbreak of the pandemic, they need to go through the compulsory sanitary confinement and take the PCR test. If the result is positive, the migrant is treated just like a Tunisian citizen at confinement centers and given medication. If the result is negative, then freedom of movement is guaranteed for the migrant.
Despite its limited budget and human resources, the regional health department in the southern region of Medellin is providing medical treatment and free vaccination for irregular migrants. The Tunisian Red Crescent says the majority of residents at migrant hosting centers are young and healthy.
All irregular migrants must have access to the vaccine on an equal basis with Tunisian nationals. The health department needs to step up the pace of the vaccination campaign and facilitate the integration of sub-Saharan migrants into the national vaccination platform, EVAX.
According to the Tunisian Forum for Economic and Social Rights, the undocumented migrants who failed to reach Europe departed from Libya. Many Nigerians are among the new arrivals.
Part of our consular intervention is to encourage Nigerians to enroll on the government EVAX platform. We have just made the announcement and all of them have shown willingness to register and acquire the vaccine. So we are going to also encourage them to contact the Red Crescent, how to guide them, apply and also obtain the vaccine. And hopefully all of them are going to receive the vaccine.
5 attempts to illegally cross sea borders were thwarted by the Coast Guard of Sfax this week. 36 people aged between 19 and 38 were arrested. Tunisian civil society activists believe that migrants in irregular situations are at risk of being left behind during the pandemic. Experts assert that excluding undocumented migrants from COVID-19 vaccination programs carries the risk of transmission in these communities with spillovers into the entire population. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Plastic waste management is a major concern in Nigeria given the country's growing population. Close to 80% of solid waste generated is either burned or buried, which poses an environmental threat. But more Nigerians are finding innovative ways to turn plastic into profits while protecting the environment. CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam brings us that story.
Intisa Kofi supervises ongoing production at a waste recycling company in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. The 29-year-old green architect recycles plastic waste into interlocking tiles. Intisa and her team use single-use plastic for production to reduce its high risk to the ecosystem. The collection is done through a huge value chain of formal and informal players.
We use the what we call the LDP, that's the low density polyethylene. Once it's discarded, and it has a very high risk and the danger is very big. This is the smaller ones that, you know, all these animals we eat without knowing, and the danger is greater. We have different ways of collection. One of the ways is to get it from scavengers. These are very big players in the market who have the required tonnage we need always.
There have been rising concerns over plastic waste and the harmful risk it poses to the environment in Nigeria. So recycling advocates and business owners like Muizuddin Kosomo are turning to eco-friendly products like the plastic interlock, creating a huge profit potential for eco-friendly businesses.
And when I did find out about iFreak Eco Solutions, it made sense to give it a shot to see how their interlocking tiles would be a game changer for our structure here. And it turned out that it was a very good investment. Long term, we are better off. While the initial investment is a bit more than what you would get for the regular tiles, but the long-term benefit that comes from using the pure water sachet-made blocks is very significant.
Nigeria ranks 9th out of 20 major plastic waste polluters. The West African nation contributes about 0.85 tons to the global 513 million tons of plastic waste, which end up polluting the ocean annually. Intissa is one out of many who want to change that, but funding has been a challenge. Despite the business she runs having huge profit potential and a high market demand, production capacity has remained low.
We don't produce all year round. When we started, we still need some things in place. So that's why we only produce based on order. And we have been trying to optimize production. Some of the challenges is the equipment to work with.
The government can leverage on sustainability by encouraging young people to provide green solutions. I think the government can come up with like a green fund, which they can use to support enterprises and individuals that have all these ideas.
Waste management plays a huge role in Nigeria's sustainable development goals. Green enthusiasts like Intissa believe the government can leverage on the huge potential in the waste recycling sector to ramp up job creation and a safer ecosystem. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
All right, let's now catch up with the latest in business news, and for that, we cross over to Uche.
Thanks, Peninah. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. South Africa turns to private firms to improve the country's electricity supply. And Ghana cuts its lending rate to 13.5% as it recovers from the pandemic.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Well, let's start off in South Africa. The country is seeking additional electricity from private contractors in a bid to address the long-standing power outages. Now, the latest program is designed to run for 3 years and may benefit renewable energy plants that already won the right to supply electricity. South Africa has been hit by intermittent power outages for more than a decade now. That's because the country's state power utility, Eskom, can't meet nationwide demand. Now, the government has tendered for 2,000 megawatts of power from any technology to be delivered by August next year, and plans additional tenders for electricity produced from the sun, wind, and natural gas. And heading to Zimbabwe now, the country's Consolidated Diamond says it will be able to increase production of rough gems by about 30% to 3 million carats this year. And it's all thanks to improved mining methods. Now, the company produced 2.3 million carats worth of diamonds in 2020 and mostly sold them to India and the Middle East. Its higher production comes as the global diamond industry recovers from the onset of the coronavirus pandemic. Now, Zimbabwe, which also has gold and platinum, is desperate to boost mining output and foreign exchange earnings. The country is struggling with soaring inflation caused in large part by shortages of hard currency and a lack of foreign investment. Meanwhile, the state-owned Nigeria National Petroleum Corporation is looking to buy a 20% stake in Africa's biggest refinery project. The commissioning of the Dangote refinery is expected to start in early 2022. Well, as CGTN's Deji Badmus now explores, the refinery is critical for Nigeria. Despite being the continent's biggest crude oil exporter, it has to import all the fuel used in the country since, of course, all the four state-owned refineries aren't operational.
Reputed to be Africa's biggest oil refining facility and the world's largest single-train plant with a 650,000 barrels per day capacity, the Dangote refinery is nearing completion and expected to begin operations next year. It's one of the 6 private refineries being built that the government-owned NNPC has expressed interest in acquiring minority equity stake in. The NNPC says the move is in line with government policy, which stipulates the mandatory participation of the state's oil firm in any privately owned refinery that exceeds 50,000 barrels per day capacity, so as to safeguard national energy security. The plan has raised eyebrows, but experts say it may not be out of place, calling instead for transparency in the entire process.
The first thing we need to look at is for the deciders, in which case the government and the NNPC, to let us know the parameters with which they decided that they wanted to invest in Dangote. The second part of it is that how is this investment different from other PPP investments, public-private partnerships? And then we need to understand if they are similar, why are the requisite authorities not involved?
It's a welcome development because whether you like it or not, what they're going to be producing there is something that the nation will need for a very long time. So a strategic asset like that in a nation where you predominantly depend so much on petroleum products, I think is a wise decision for the Nigerian Petroleum Corporation to invest or buy up some shares, buy up some stakes in that business. So they too can also, it will help them, stay in the decision-making structure of that transaction or that plant.
In March, the government approved the sum of $1.5 billion for the immediate rehabilitation of its 4 refineries, which have been grounded for several years. The move to acquire stakes in private-owned refineries has raised concerns about the rehabilitation process of the government-owned refineries.
I think I will also prefer to advise, personally as an individual, that the Nigerian government and NNPC should focus more on revamping our own national-owned refineries. That is how national governments do, whether it is in China or in Korea or in Brazil or anywhere. They should be more interested in fixing their national assets.
Despite being Africa's biggest oil producer, Nigeria imports virtually all the refined petrol consumed in the country, costing the government over $300 million in monthly subsidy. The Dangote refinery is expected to address the problem and transform the country into an exporter of refined petrol. Deji Badmus, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Now, Ghana's central bank has reduced its lending rate from 14.5% to 13.5%. That comes as the country's economy steadily recovers from the disruptions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, as CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai reports, the government hopes that the rate cut will further boost economic activities.
Ghana's economy has begun to rebound after the easing of COVID-19 lockdown restrictions. The central bank says the improvement in the economy has allowed the cost of goods and services to decrease. It says inflation had dropped from 10.3% in March to 8.5% in April due to lower food prices. The central bank has now reduced the lending rate from 14.5% to 13.5% to enable businesses to borrow more to support economic growth. The central bank fixed its lending rate at 14.5% in March last year when COVID-19 struck. It maintained it 6 times as Ghana's economy struggled to deal with the pandemic. The central bank says the local economy has now picked up and banks are confident to give out loans to businesses with the assurance of getting their money back. The government is rolling out the second shots of COVID-19 vaccines as it aims to inoculate 20 million people by the end of the year. Analysts say the success of the vaccine rollout could further open the country's economy. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Now, more than 150 exhibitors, including 14 African nations, have been taking part in the first Inter-African Import-Export Fair happening in Algiers. Now, the event hopes to boost economic ties through partnerships and investments on the continent. It is part of continued efforts to make sure that companies benefit from the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. Ramping up production and increasing exports have been a key focus at the Import-Export Fair.
The Africa Free Trade Area will change the face of Africa. I call on the Algerian institutions to seize this real opportunity in order to develop trade exchanges with African countries and to benefit from the facilities granted in the field of custom duties.
There is a real interest in Mali in the Algerian product. The economic exchange between Algerian and Malian dealers is a wonderful thing, and it would be better to establish a joint chamber of commerce between the two countries.
I think that we must bring policies and efforts closer between the dealers in Africa, and this salon that is hosted in Algeria is a good example of that. Cameroon is a promising market and is ready for trade exchanges with Africans.
Meanwhile, a summer holiday in Europe may now be easier. That the bloc's digital COVID certificates are live a month ahead of schedule. The passes are meant to reboot travel by cutting down on the hassle of testing and quarantine. And as CGTN's Tony Waterman explained, some countries are wasting no time in issuing them out.
The sun appears to be setting on the solitude of a pandemic summer. The EU has officially launched its COVID certificate gateway, a system to verify whether travelers have been vaccinated, have recovered from the virus, or have tested negative within 72 hours. The gateway underpins the EU's digital COVID certificate, which offers the promise of unlocking hassle-free travel around Europe this summer.
This is a great success, well ahead of time, which gives us every reason to be confident that the system will be fully up and running by the 1st of July.
July is the deadline to start issuing the passes, but some member states are wasting no time. 10 linked up on day 1, and 7, including Denmark, Greece, and Croatia, are already issuing passes to their citizens and accepting them from visitors. The certificates, which take the form of a QR code, are meant to exempt travelers from restrictions like quarantine and testing.
Whoever is not vaccinated can get a digital certificate for test or recovery. Whoever does not have a smartphone can get it on paper. With the certificate, we want to help people to move freely in times of pandemic.
The COVID pass could be the jolt the EU tourism industry and its 30 million workers needs, and a way to restore some semblance of free movement around the bloc after 15 months of cross-border restrictions.
For now, the COVID certificate is for Europeans only, but Brussels is in talks with outsiders like the U.S. on extending the program. Before they can do that, though, they'll have to find a way to ensure all the documents are authentic. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Brussels.
And the China-Beijing International Wine Expo begins this week after a delay of more than a year due to the coronavirus pandemic. Over 300 exhibitors from across the world are attending. CGTN's Liu Zheshan has more.
Look, smell, and taste. A bottle of wine has never been too far from our reach, even during the height of the global pandemic. Months of restrictions may have put a damper on travel, but for many, it hasn't stopped the desire to drink.
Between bottles, it's not hard to find that China's imported wine market has been back to its bustle and hustle. Exhibitors from countries like France, Italy, Spain, and Israel have all expressed their confidence in Chinese market even amid the pandemic.
So I called my partner and say, it's a chance actually to be in China because China controls the COVID. It's very, very good compared to European countries.
China's rapid economic recovery and the withdrawal of Australian wine have given Italian wine a big opportunity. Our diverse products are suitable for the Chinese market.
In the first 4 months of 2020, China's wine imports fell by a quarter in both quantity and amount, compared to the same period in 2019. Suffering from the initial trauma of COVID-19, International Wine and Spirits Research predicts total global alcohol sales will not return to pre-pandemic levels until 2024. But according to the Wine Intelligence Report, home isolation did not reduce the frequency of alcohol consumption. Instead, they say people resorted to liquor to relieve stress during hard times.
During the pandemic, because the people want to enjoy, because closed at home, so you need to do something, so they drink more than before.
Industry insiders say the virus has forced a reshuffle in the industry, but it's also presented some favorable opportunities. Online retail in China has helped to stabilize the fortunes of many overseas vintners and taught them the great value of digital. Liu Jiaxing, CGTN, Beijing.
Well, that's all for now on Africa Live Biz, but coming up later on Global Business Africa, ExxonMobil has surrendered its 80% interest in Ghana's Deepwater Cape 3 Points offshore block. We look at why and, of course, the implications of this move. Well, Peninah is coming back with more news right after this short break. Stay with us.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Egypt's Education Ministry has announced it will introduce Mandarin as an optional second language in schools from the academic year, which starts in September. Here's Yasser Hakim with more details.
Egypt was the first Middle Eastern and African country to set up Chinese language departments in its universities more than a decade ago. Now it has added Mandarin in the school curriculum, giving many Egyptians the chance to learn the language. Hiba Fouad, a school director, has backed the move.
I respect this decision very much. The Minister for Education has shown vision with this decision. We know China is a great nation that is growing at a very fast pace. With the development we have here, a lot of Chinese companies entered the market with investments and partnerships to support the process. Adding Chinese would prepare the youth for employment opportunities with a new language. We are saturated with English and French languages. Therefore, it's a smart decision to include a language that has a global economic weight like the Chinese language.
China's rise on the global scene and the stronger economic and cultural relations with Egypt have led to more young people seeking to learn Mandarin.
It's a good idea. Besides French and English, we want a new language, especially now that relations with China are strong. So it's an important move.
Mandarin will be on the curriculum for primary school students first and will then be added to other school years as an elective subject.
I expect there will be high demand from students to learn the language. Egyptians like a challenge. It's a totally new language, a different one than what we have, and whoever learns it will be unique within the labor market. It's a language that's in demand around the world, not just in Egypt.
The introduction of Mandarin in the next school year in September coincides with the new online educational system implemented after the outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
And coming up in sports, Tokyo Olympics organizer